So I'm going to invite Or up, and we're going to do a quick demo, and then Or is going to sit down with Matt and with Peter and talk a little bit about the notification stream under the headline of Notifications Eat Apps. So give a little bit of context here. Matt wrote a post. Matt, where's Matt? Matt's outside. Oh, no, Matt's there. Matt wrote a post. When was your post? Your sort of app? Early 2014, Matt wrote a post, which is sort of the basic thesis was, you know, is the stream of notification going to eat apps? Zach, who is here eating right now, wrote a post this morning, which is not quite the same post, but which was... But it was the same theme, and you can see this meme is moving through, and we're trying to digest what this meme means. And so I think we're going to have a really good conversation. I want to set it up with Or, who's the founder of Yo, and who's going to show us a new app. Come on up.
Thank you.
So I think we click here. Let's see how this goes.
So yeah, it's an app, it's a platform, it's called Push Apps, temporary name. And it's, yeah, let's just play it.
And then you can talk to it for a minute.
This is the first ever demo of a new platform we have codenamed Push Apps. Ever since notifications have become interactive, they allow us to create more than just notifications that notify us about something, but instead can replicate functionality of apps. This app that I'm showing contains nothing but an app store and an inbox. And the initial release contains a set of push apps created by us, but we're making it easy for developers and publishers to add to our ecosystem. I'll go ahead and show some of these apps. Let's look at this Learn Spanish app. This app sends a silent push a few times a day with words in Spanish. And I got a push saying, Bajito means tiny or huge. I don't know what it means. I'll try tiny. I get another push that says tiny. Good. So I can now get another question or say I'm good. So for now I'm good. Let's take a look at tracking apps, for example. So currently people that want to track water consumption or remind themselves, they just set reminders. And these are just constant reminders. And with this type of interactive notifications, what we can do is not only remind, based on my reply, if I had a cup of water or not, the next reminder can, so this is much more dynamic and smart. Let's go ahead and look in an app called Night Out. So Night Out is a flow app, and by flow app, I'll show you what it means, what it does. It's basically a few questions. So it asks me, going out tonight, and I can say, hell yeah. And then it asks me what kind, and I will say, let's say live show. Now I get another question, it asks me a show. I will say stand-up comedy. So it says, Louis performing tonight at SF Theater. Now I can get tickets or start over. If I press get tickets, it takes me to an affiliate website that sells tickets to that show. That's the Night Out, and these flow apps can be used by a lot of different things. Now let's take a look at poll apps, flash poll apps. So if I'm into politics, I can enable the Vox Politics app. For example, this is a demo app, and I get a push saying, John Boehner has resigned as Speaker of the House. Is this good, or I'm gonna go ahead and say good. And nice, I can go ahead and text this, and it will also link back to the original article. Now, let's try the BuzzFeed polls one. So I'm gonna push asking me, is it blue or white, the dress? and I will say blue. I get back, it says 1,654 people, and you think it's blue, which means 8,655 people vision checked because it's totally white and gold. And I can tweet this, for example. Okay, so as you can see with these instant polling apps, not only we're generating instant polls, but also linking to the original contact. These polls can even be scientific and location based if we have a large enough user base. What Gallup polls does in 3 days, with this we can do in 3 minutes. All these apps that you saw are open sourced, and we're going to have developers and publishers create notification-based interactions such as these. These are frictionless. There is no need to open apps to interact with them. They also work closely on the Apple Watch as well. So yeah, thanks for watching.
Okay. So
Yeah, cool. That's
thank
the
you.
app.
You want to grab a seat? But let's invite Peter and Matt up, and you guys take it from here.
Oh, you put me in the center.
That made it
I like this.
very strategic. I like this.
So Peter, thank you for being our moderator today.
Well, hold on. I think John announced that you were the moderator earlier, so I think actually we're going to try to have no moderator, but really, even though I have a list of questions which I actually printed out, which I think is a little anachronistic, but I thought that what Orr was showing off was a good example of, I think, some of the ideas that you put forth in your article from last year around the way that the notification stream sort of absorbs apps and app-like functionality. I thought what would be cool is to kind of, you know, from the time that you've written that to now, have you seen like a progression towards what you laid out, or where do you think we are right now in that process?
So when I originally wrote the piece, I had been looking to write a larger piece, which I have still never written, which is my curse as an editor. But the notes that I was taking and the people that I was interviewing for that piece was all around push as an operating system. So my thesis was that push would eventually become an OS of its own, and that a lot of apps would run on that without having any native, containers on a device even. And of course, there's a lot of steps that still need to happen in that. You need to allow apps to run on a layer that doesn't exist on the device itself, which Apple doesn't do, Android does some of, and things like that. But that was my thesis. And so I started interviewing a bunch of people, and then Foursquare released Swarm at the time, and I was like, oh, this is a good inflection point. There's something interesting here. And even though it had a silo, it had a native silo, almost 99.9% of the interactions at that time, they've since actually added a bunch of functionality back into the app, which I think is fun. But at the time, most of the interactions with that app were outside of the app silo itself. And if the icon disappeared, it would not inhibit your functionality in that app. And so I think that was the basic thesis. And since then, I've seen people start to play with that, and I even think it was touched on earlier, but there are basically two ways people are doing it. They're using text, which as the interface on the phone, which I still think is like reliant on a native silo, which is your text messaging app or whatever. And then the other one is the stuff that like Orr's playing with notifications. Some of the stuff that I've seen isn't public. Some of it is starting to leak out, but it's a lot of stuff around people being able to take immediate action on things that are contextually aware. And so that's starting to happen.
And why do you guys think now this is starting to happen? Is it partly because of the competition for attention? I mean, if you think about the notification layer on our devices, that it's obviously the first place where people tend to interact with their devices now, right? It's pushed to you, it's on your home, you don't even have to open the device to get the notifications and to interact with them. And so is our developer sort of focus moving to that layer because you're able to sort of get ahead of everybody else a little bit, or is it really that the platform makers, namely Apple and Google, I guess, are starting to layer in additional functionality there, and so we're able to do things we couldn't do before, or a mixture of the two?
Yeah, I think it's both. First of all, yes. So Apple introduced the two buttons that you can add to notifications in iOS 8. It's been a year ago. It still haven't caught up with everything. Not everybody knows about it. A lot of people don't know about it. Just us geeks know about it. But I think in about a year from now, more people are going to use it, especially if we are going to make these buttons actually helpful. Currently, the buttons are not always helpful, and so people are used to something that is static and it's not dynamic and it's not always relevant. But the more and more apps are going to use it better, the more people that know about it will use it. Yeah.
So Apple released some updates to the push notification services with iOS 8 that increased the amount of cache that you could use for notifications to like increase the amount of functionality and graphics and things that you can include in them. And that was, I think, a precursor to a lot of the advanced functionality that they have built and that they will build in the future. But I think that that is an indicator, that they understand that there is richer, more interactive things that can happen there. But I think that if you look at the cause of it, I think it's really about the people having available context, and context like precise location or proximity. I mean, if you look at the Apple Watch, for instance, the most successful apps on the Apple Watch so far, which is, they're not very many, there are only a handful that have any sort of real like success in getting things right, I believe. It's just a personal thing. But they enable you to act within a thin temporal window and then enable you to act on that within 1 to 3 seconds. That's a successful app on the Apple Watch. And not like, oh, I'm going to poke and prod at it, not I'm going to get something and interact with it for long periods of time. That's not a successful Apple Watch app. It's the thin slot that you shoot through and then you act on it very quickly. And a lot of that depends on things like proximity, and precise proximity too. Oh, sure, you're here, but then how far away from this thing are you? Are you 6 inches away or are you 12 inches away? 12 inches away, I don't care. I don't give a crap. But 6 inches away, now I care. Now I can unlock your door for you. If you're walking by your car door to your trunk, I don't want to unlock the car so somebody can climb in. But if you put your hand on the handle, I want to unlock it. And notifications work the same way. If you give somebody a notification, for instance, they step off of a curb from one neighborhood into another, and then Foursquare gives me a notification that says, oh, you saved 6 places here, you can eat at this place, I can go, oh, good, I didn't want to go to this crappy coffee shop. I wanted to go to that one that Peter saved in Foursquare, and I noticed that he said was delicious. So I want to go there instead. And that step off that curb, that moment, when I look at it and see, and hopefully don't get hit by a car, but when I look at it and see it, that is a success, right? And anything else, if it's 1 minute earlier, 2 minutes earlier, and I go, oh, I'm not even in that neighborhood, or if it's later when I'm already at the other coffee shop, it's like, oh, I noticed you're at this coffee shop. By the way, you saved these other ones. I'm not going to get up, So that's a failure. So it's a thin window. And that's when the notifications, I think, the success of it is now dependent on.
And so how do you think we're going to balance, both as developers and more widely as users, the noisiness that starts to come in the notification stream, right? Which is every app developer has an incentive to push as many notifications as they can get away with because they're all competing for your attention. And we know that most smartphone users today are not installing that many new apps. I think, the average number of new apps installed per month is 0. And so most users are not adopting new apps, and it's really difficult for a new app to get traction. And we know that one of the ways that you try to drive engagement and retain users is to push them new notifications and try to pull them back into the app and re-engage them. And that's created sort of a noisiness in the stream for people. How do you think that we start to balance that, especially if the notification layer becomes someplace that even more functionality happens, more things are going on? How do you start to balance these things as a user and then conversely as a developer?
So I think that since notifications are now interactive and rich, it doesn't only necessarily have to be something that pulls you inside the app. So if these notifications can help you get stuff done from the notification, and they're relevant, as you say, then it's very valuable. If it's just a notification that reminds me to go inside the app, that's annoying. But another thing that can happen with these interactive notifications is feedback. so I can give feedback to the app that is sending me these notifications if these are relevant to me or not from the notification itself. And if we as app developers take note of this feedback and improve, then users will like that. But if not, they'll just delete the app.
I mean, most notifications are incredibly stupid, right? Like stupid. They're just like, oh, there's a new thing, right? I mean, when your kid does that, you forgive them because they don't understand the context. They're just like, Dad, and you're like, yes, my love. What do you need? You know, and you do that because they're needy. But when an app does that, they should know better, right? It's done. That era is done. And if you aren't using contextual signals or intelligence to deliver people things that they can either act on immediately or give them some real value immediately on the receipt of that notification, then you're dumb. You're gone.
But I wonder, when does the intelligence have to move to the way that the stream is prioritized itself? Because I think right now we're in the pre-priority inbox phase. I mean, I know that people have built some solutions for Android, but when does, say, Apple recognize that? And it's actually kind of amazing that they just figured out how to properly do reverse chronological notifications with iOS 9. I'm still shocked when I saw it the other day. But at some point, the intelligence can't just be at the developer, at the app level, because you're also competing for attention with everything else that's on the device. And at some point, I mean, Apple and Google have to figure out how to prioritize notifications, or at least create a smarter, more intelligent experience for the user, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that something's going to happen there. I mean, the reason that the reverse cron thing even happened, by the way, is that Touch ID is too fast now. And so they had to reorder your notifications tab in an order that made sense to you, that looked like it was on your lock screen, so that when you lifted your phone and your screen was already unlocked before you got out of your pocket, that the notifications were in the same order, so that you didn't feel lost. And so if they could think that far ahead, then they can probably think of a way to allow developers to surface things. The problem is going to be in moderation, right? Like, how do they decide what's important? Does the app give them a signal, or does the OS give the signal? And I think it has to be the OS, because otherwise, you know, everybody's just going to fight, and it's going to end up in the same order, right? Mine's at the top. Mine's the most important.
Yeah.
So I think it's got to be at the OS level.
Because it seems like there's this sort of tragedy of the commons where, and the commons is our attention, right? And the tragedy is everyone has an incentive, like I was saying earlier, to push as much into that stream to grab our attention, to grab our engagement. And at some point, users have the option to either shut notifications entirely off for a specific app, which doesn't really solve the problem, like throws the baby out with the bathwater, or to, in some cases, I guess some apps have very granular settings for what kind of notifications you can get. But like I was saying, like it seems like we have to get to some point where at the OS level, you can get a customized version of that notification stream for you that's suited to like your interests and I think that has to be contextually relevant in terms of location, in terms of time of day, like all these things that we don't have right now, but you can see 1, 2, 3 years from now, what you see on your phone is hyper relevant to what you care about right now.
Yeah, I think that's what Google now is doing currently. I think it should happen on iOS too. I don't see Apple is doing that, but Apple does improve what you can do with notifications. It started with 256 bytes, then it went on to 2K, and now it's 4K with iOS 9. To me, it seems like they put the 4K for a reason. I don't know why, but they're gonna add more abilities to do with notifications. And to me, it seems like the notification center is gonna be more rich. And if it's gonna be contextual, we're gonna have a stream of cards that allow you to get stuff done from the notification itself instead of using apps for that.
And what about, you guys can also ask questions.
I have a question for you, actually.
Okay.
What do you think, and you too, what do you think is going to be the way that people monetize an app that only exists in the notification stream?
That's a really good question, because I think right now, if you are an app that, and your monetization is primarily through advertising, you actually want to use a notification to pull somebody back into your app so you can show them an ad, right? And I think that it's not hard to see some sort of transactional based element to notifications being a part of the experience. I mean, it's not hard to see there being little buy buttons or something like that in the notification down the line. But yeah, I think it's a challenge for, like, if you are, say, a news, let's say you do news, to be able to, the more you push the content, the main part of the content experience into the notification itself, and the less people have to go back into your app or to your web page to be able to consume the news, the more you're giving up an opportunity for monetization, right? And I think that's
At least under the ad model, under the view
under
eyeball model.
under the ad model, right? Like, you might say, like, we have all this engagement, but if the engagement happens, just from the notification, that's you've created this whole audience for your product, which you don't get to generate any revenue from.
Yeah, I think eventually, sometimes you can do stuff from the notification itself. Sometimes you eventually have to go inside some website or something. So that's one stream of revenue where affiliates can be the end of this journey in notifications. The other thing I think is brand engagement is also something. You don't always have to see an ad or click buy or something like that. Sometimes the only fact that you engage with a brand on notification later on, when you want to buy something, you will use that brand, but that's also something valuable. It's always this, trade-off between what the user wants and what the publishers want. So we want to make notifications fun for users. If it's going to be just a stream of ads, that's going to kill it. Yeah, I think brand engagement is what's going to make it.
And like transaction-based businesses, seems like it's a no-brainer. So Square Cash, for instance, I'm not sure if they make any money on cash, but if somebody requests money from me, and I swipe on my notification, why can't I just hit pay? Just right there on the button. Because a transaction-based business makes some sense, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they have that for the watch, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it makes me wonder almost from a user experience standpoint, in terms of designing the way that we engage with our phones, right? We had this model for so many years where you basically had screens filled with icons, right? And that was primarily how you interacted with your device. And now we have this sort of layer abstracted on top of it, which is the notifications, and then with Spotlight, with iPhone, and I wonder how does Apple and how do Google sort of start to manage that as sort of the primary experience that people have with their device? Because for so many years we had what we knew was the field of icons, right? And that was sort of like that was where people started their smartphone experiences. And now they're starting at a different place. And I think, is it partly a recognition that people are using relatively few apps? I mean, you might have dozens and dozens of apps on your phone, but they're really just a handful that you use regularly, and it's a recognition that you want to start to optimize the top level of that experience for those handful of apps?
Yeah, totally. I think that notifications and the Spotlight, you have so many apps and you have so many things and you have too much noise, basically. And so you want to float the important stuff to the top, and one of the way to do that is with notifications that are relevant. They need to be relevant, and they need to help you get stuff done, and the Spotlight as well.
But the thing I wonder, is does it end up reinforcing the sort of dominant position that a handful of apps would have today, right? Whereas if you were trying to build something new that's an app, but even if it does focus on notifications or something like that, is it hard to kind of break through and get somebody to adopt? Is it going to be harder now to break through and establish something new if you have if now we're starting to optimize the smartphone UX around those handful of sort of entrenched apps that people are using?
Oh, and I think that you have to stop thinking about notifications as a sales tool first for that to work. And I think that right now, that's the way it works because that's the way it works.
Yeah.
Right? You install the app, and if nobody goes back into it within a day, theoretically, hopefully they get a notification, they swipe on it and go back into it, and then they build a habit, right? And instead, you have to start thinking of building a habit through usefulness and building a habit through immediate action so that when they take action on that notification, they build an awareness that this thing is helping them, that it's making a difference in their daily life, saving them time or whatever. And that's harder to do, but that's no excuse.
Yeah.
And using it as a sales tool is going to be like the lowest common denominator. And that's if it exists that way, keeps existing that way, that's the way it will always be. And you will end up with that sort of like fight, and nothing will ever change. But like if you look at intelligence and notifications. So like Lyft, which is a habit building, personal coaching app actually, at Tony Stubblemind's building, but I don't think I'm giving away any secret sauce here, but they use notifications in a very interesting way. So like if they send one and you interact with it right away, maybe they don't send you one for a while, or they send you one in a timely fashion. But if they send one and you don't interact with it, maybe they just lay off for a day.
Yeah.
And so that kind of intelligence has to be built into all of this at a basic level. And if you don't, think of the interactions and signals you're getting from the user as a part of your notification strategy, then you're already falling behind.
Yeah. Because I wonder, it's like, okay, let's say we get to a place in a couple of years where the stream is, the notification layer, let's call it, is where your primary place where you interact with it's where you interact first, right, with your phone. And if you, it used to be, as an app, when you were an app developer, that your goal was, you want to have the app icon on the home screen of the phone, right? To be on that first page of icons. Now it might be, okay, I want to make sure that my notifications surface at the top priority of that. And it's not like you can, I guess there might be, that's not something that you're going to be able to game in the ways that you could game SEO, for example.
I don't think it's thinking about it in the right way, though. I don't think it's
but,
the top.
But what I'm saying is if you're starting out,
but it's got to be useful. That's the thing. Like at the right time.
Yes, but what I'm saying is that like it's. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you are, a user installs your app for the first time, it's at the bottom of the pile, so to speak, because your user hasn't spent very much time engaging with it, so the system won't know to surface it.
Oh, I see. You're speaking of the OS doesn't know it is important.
Exactly, and so I'm just sort of tossing this out there as sort of like future problems app developers are going to have, but it's that. The ways in which we're,
SEO for the OS.
You're gonna basically have to like figure out ways to understand how the algorithm of the phone decides to prioritize different experiences on the phone, so that you can make sure that if you build something new, and users start to engage with it, that it kind of quickly starts to surface, so that they keep engaging with it, rather than having. It's great to have notifications, but if your notifications get pushed down to the bottom of the pile, it's just how like on. If you see like top 10, most shared links on sidebar of a website, this tend to be self-fulfilling in a way because people click on those and share them or whatever.
I think the notifications that will win will actually be the most useful one and relevant one. So it doesn't matter if the notification it's not like the links that are being shared the most. So for people. If your app provides useful notifications, they will use it. If not, they will just turn off notifications.
Yeah. So the proactive is an interesting use case, right? So proactive in the notification or the pull down or the spotlight screen on iOS 9 gives you like apps you've used recently, apps that are relevant in terms of your location, things like that. And I think that when the OS gets more intelligent about handling notifications, it could surface notifications, not in terms of letting them through. It should let them all through, right? That part should be egalitarian. But it could surface or bubble up notifications that are more important in terms of time or location, just like it does with Passbook, right? So you get near the airport and your ticket comes up, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess I just think about how whenever there is an algorithm making decisions, implicit decisions of what to prioritize and put in front of you, there are always winners and there are losers, right? And I think that there are publishers who have done very well with PageRank, and publishers who've done really well with how Facebook decided to arrange things in the newsfeed. And it's not hard to imagine a world in which some developers just happen to do better than others in being surfaced at the top level of Android or iOS. Whether or not the people that are making those algorithms even think of themselves as being biased or having that kind of, like, everyone likes to think of themselves as being the sort of neutral third party that's sort of, I don't.
Which nobody is, but that's
I mean,
another
Google
discussion.
always says that, right? It's like, well, we're not deciding that you're, not on the home for first page of search
Sure,
results.
yeah,
It's just the
right,
algorithm,
okay,
right?
yeah.
And we all know that, like, lots of, publishers that sort of won and fall based on those things. So not to get too bogged down on that point, because actually one of the things I thought was also interesting is the differences and similarities between iOS and Android, and the implications that it does have for both developers and users, because we've seen this sort of leapfrogging where Android is sort of ahead in some respects, and then iOS catches up, and then iOS goes in one direction and Android goes in another. And do you think that we're going to see them constantly sort of converging or staying similar, with maybe one will have some features and another won't, and then they'll catch up? Or do you think that we're going to start to see more of a divergence between the two, and actually being difficult for developers to create similar experiences across both platforms?
To me, it seems like it's going to converge to the same experience. Apple Notification Center is basically somewhat cloned from the Android. And Android has rich notifications for a while, and now iOS starts to get there. So it seems like they're going to converge to the same experience.
I think that Android will always have a sort of more flexible mentality and more developer access, just fundamentally because of the way the companies think about things. I think that the divergence, if and when it happens, will happen based on privacy, on user privacy, how much information the OS is willing to give to the developer to use to contextualize notifications. And it may make them more powerful on Android because they're willing to give away more anonymized information, hopefully anonymized user information, to the developer to allow them to contextualize those notifications. Apple will be more reluctant just because of their mentality. And that's publicly stated. I'm not like putting words in their mouth. They literally have said that. And I think that that's going to be a key differentiator, and that will shape the way that advances. So it's not that they won't say add richer notifications or add more features to proactive or all that stuff, because I believe you're right in that they will continue to kind of like mature on a similar scale, but the divergence will happen in the realm of user privacy. And that obviously ties into a lot of things, including business model. Apple makes money when they sell a piece of hardware, and as they feel that if they treat the user with more care, they'll buy their devices. Whereas Google doesn't make the money on the hardware, and they feel that if they give the user more utility through the software, they'll end up purchasing into the ecosystem, wherever that may be. So I think that those differences in mentality will probably shape the access and progress of that. And Android, I believe, will probably progress faster in terms of that. Whether that will lead developers to go there or not is kind of depend on the monetization question.
Yeah.
So if they're able to monetize using that better on Android, then they could gravitate there.
Because it's one of the things where if you look at like Google Now, for example, and the way that it's able to mine a lot of data, especially from your account or from Gmail, to be able to push you really useful notifications that, and it has access to data that Apple doesn't always have or want to be able to use. I know Apple's tried to sort of had their response, which is not, I don't think anybody thinks it's anywhere close to what Google Now is able to do. And it can be a little eerie, right? When Google Now, you get a push notification saying, it's time for you to, it's time for you to go to leave for this next thing, or
Yes, mother.
yeah, it feels a little nagging, but it also can be really helpful. But there's also this sort of element of it being able to, and it's gotten a lot better, I think, over the years, but intelligently anticipate, your needs or interests in ways that obviously, if it doesn't have access to the data, it can't do, right? And it's not just about being able to push a notification to you, right? It's about having the data to generate something that is relevant and contextual in the moment for you. And I think that, is there a key difference for Apple and Google there in terms of the data that they're able to access and their philosophies around how do you use this data that you might collect to be able to create those kinds of contextual experiences, let's say?
I mean, I think that Google Now is probably the best thing that Google makes currently, like in terms of services. It's very good. And it's good specifically because they have a wide array of information across a variety of signals. So it's not like they're real deep on one column of data. It's because they have a wide array of data. That's why it's successful, because they can triangulate. So if I do a Google search for, tips on how to beat a certain section of a game, and it says like, oh, this game is shipping next week on the release date, and there's a tracking number right in the Google search. It kind of freaks you out at first, and then the second time you see it, you're like, oh, that's cool. You're like, oh, I wonder where that is, and you click and you get the, oh, it's in Alabama or whatever, So I think that kind of triangulation thing will help them. And it's just going to be a matter of public perception, which is why I believe Apple is waging kind of like a war of public perception as far as privacy goes. I mean, I believe them. I believe that user privacy is important to them, but it's still a matter of convincing people that their privacy matters, which has always been hard.
So I have a contextual alert from Google Now, which is we should open it up.
Okay. I have a funny Google Now story.
Particularly, I want to hear from Zach, if you don't mind. But let's open it up to. So, was that contextual?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say my quick
Thank you for
Google
that
Now
contextual
anecdote
alert.
was I have a Gmail address. It's projas@gmail, and if anybody wants to get in touch. But a lot of people think that they also have that email address, and so I got someone, I get, actually almost every day I get like email meant for somebody else. And so somebody booked an airline ticket using my email address, and I started getting the alerts for the airline ticket. And so Google kept saying, like, it's time for leave to the airport. And then it's like, you're in Dusseldorf, like, here's where you should go eat. And so I started getting like all day for like the duration of this trip, alerts related to like somebody else's trip. And it actually is, when you get an alert saying you're late for the airport, it can be really disconcerting, especially when the airport, is in like Miami or wherever, and you're not even close to it. But yeah, we should definitely open it up. I know Matt also had his hand up. Do we have a mic that?
Yeah.
There we go. Chelsea has mics.
Yeah.
Number 1.
Something I'd love to see more of, and it's more accessible on Android than iOS.
Who are you?
Oh, Matt Mullenweg, Automatic WordPress. When you think of all the telemetry on the device, like, is it in your pocket? Are you moving? Are you driving? Is it face down? Is it face up? Like, all the sort of like basic sensors of a device are incredibly contextual for knowing what kind of alerts to provide. But like you said, like, the OS is really going to have to handle some of this, because every app making its decisions on its own will eventually have an economic incentive to be as intrusive as possible. So you don't want it like, as soon as you start to pull your phone out, like all of a sudden things start popping up because it knows that you're about to look at it. But even basic things like, we don't know, as an app, you don't really know like how many other notifications there are. Whether they've read them, these sorts of things of yours. If you think of how much instrumentation we have around email versus around notifications, it's like dark ages. Like, there's not great frameworks for A/B testing, for sending out multivariants, knowing what time zone people are in, like all these sorts of things. We're just kind of cobbling stuff together. And it seems like right now people are just building this over and over and over again as they get more sophisticated with their notifications. So that's also a question for the room. Like, I'm curious if anyone's seen any great layers there, or if they've built something they found to be really effective that we should all rebuild.
So, I mean, I think that it has to happen at the OS level. Otherwise, it's going to be, it's almost like we're all waiting for Google and Apple to they have to be aware of it.
You can't wait. Has anybody built anything interesting in that space that they're not afraid anybody's going to steal if they say it right now?
Well, there is something
in a
called
room full of people about doing stuff about this.
Well,
behind the pillar. Hello, sir.
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, wait.
I can't see. I can't see behind the pillar.
So
Say
I
who
guess
you are, please.
Oh, I'm Alex Nako again from Share the Bus. So if like you said, if apps should not, I guess if we buy into the old idea that a computer should never ask you a question that it already knows the answer to, is there a flip side of that for notifications, that a computer should never tell you something that you already know the answer to? And do notifications make that better, or do they make that worse? Right? If everything is siloed inside of apps, then apps have a reasonable excuse to not know something. But does that excuse go away now?
Do you have thoughts, or?
I don't know.
I mean, I think that part of being useful is being useful, right? And it's something you already know is not useful to you. I have this editorial philosophy that if you, no matter how long or short or whatever the topic of a piece is, if somebody reads that piece and comes away feeling a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more empowered, you're building a little patina, a layer by layer of trust in you as an author or as in a publication. So every time they click, they know they're going to get something of value, because that is not an age thing or a geography thing or an upbringing thing. That's a human thing. Like, everybody loves that. They love to be able, the next time they're in a conversation about something, they go, oh no, yeah, Tesla introduced that yesterday, but it's not going to be available for 12 months because they read an article about it, right? And so that's just the media side of things. But I think you could apply that to the app. So if you, as a developer, think, am I empowering them or am I informing them, and then try to do your best to work your way backwards from there and saying, is this new to them? Then I think that will be a successful notification.
Hi. Sorry. Sure. Okay. Hi, I'm Drew from AOL Alpha. As Matt and Peter know, AOL is a great advertising company, and so one of the things we always worry about is our advertising team kind of coming over and kind of taking what we're building. And one of the biggest fears I have for notifications is when we start building out native advertising within notifications, and everything is about, hey, by the way, it's raining out, this message brought to you by, whatever, Verizon, of course. How do you anticipate once kind of native advertising actually starts kind of inundating notifications, how is it going to affect their importance and their worth to us as people?
Well, it's funny because I think that it's clear that, as Matt said, that email and the tools we have around managing email are far advanced, are so much more advanced than what we have to manage notifications. In fact, we have very few tools to manage notifications. Really, you can kind of shut them off for an app, or you can keep them on. And it'd be like if your only options with email were to block someone entirely from sending you a message, or to not, right? And I think that it's clear that we're going to have, if we're going to have the equivalent of spam for notifications, and obviously any message from Verizon is clearly really important, but
yes, very important.
Actually, no, you know what? I can say whatever I want now, right? Since I don't work there anymore. But but I think that we're going to have. I think that users are going to have tools to help them manage it. And I think what'll be interesting is that I think that the expectation from the user side is actually very high, right? I mean, the iPhone came out over 8 years ago, and I think that we're going to have a generation of teenagers soon who have never known a world without the iPhone, and so their expectation that they're going to have a device which offers a really high quality experience all the time, that's just going to be like a baseline, table stakes thing for them. And so the idea that the notifications are going to become a place that annoy them or bother them or offer them sort of low quality experience. I mean, I can't imagine that we may have a problem, a short-term problem, but I think long-term it has to get solved. Just in the same way that we had to solve the problem for email, right? There was a point, I think, for those of us who have been in tech for a long time, where we thought spam is going to make email a thing that dies because we can't solve this problem. And we did, for the most part. Not that we never get spam, but that we figured out how to solve the problem. We built the tools and the infrastructure. And I think the same thing will happen for the notification layer.
Hi. Oh no, this is 4 minutes ago, but
Alex, right? Yeah. So what you were saying about is it okay for the software to ask you questions that you already know the answer to, or for humans to ask questions of software, or vice versa? I always think about this from the perspective of trying to simulate the conversations that we have normally as humans, but just instead of a human talking to a human, it's like a human talking to a robot. And like a key part of a lot of those conversations are, hey, let me just repeat back to you what I just heard so I understand it, as well as like asking rhetorical questions to tease that stuff out. And to your points on stage about the Google stuff, Google Now specifically feeling so cold and creepy, it's because it's always just the robot talking at you, not trying to have like a conversation. And I think when you start to put those little nuances in of like, oh, let me ask you a rhetorical question. Let me repeat back what I heard. Let me have some witty banter. They're kind of the same way that Siri does if you really prompt it to. I think that's kind of the key to making some of this stuff feel, more believable and less, just less creepy in general.
So I totally agree with that. And I think one way to look at it might be in saying one of the main things that notifications do when they're effective, and one of the things that people do with each other when we communicate, is we resolve ambiguity. When you communicate something effectively, it's because you've taken something from a state that has some ambiguity to another state where there's less ambiguity.
Yeah.
And ineffective notifications or communications are often ones that do not do that. It's like, you have 4 new email messages, but we're not going to tell you what they are, right? That doesn't resolve anything. And meanwhile, I think I absolutely agree with the notion that if a computer repeats back to you, let me verify, in fact, that I've understood what you're saying, that's ambiguity resolution right there.
Sure.
Right? It's confirming I did in fact understand. You don't have to worry about whether I did or not.
Yeah.
So whether you knew it or not is not the point. It's I've reduced some of that uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the notification is just the end of the story. It's like someone that's speaking to you that won't let you, you don't have the opportunity to reply back. You're getting these emails, these notifications about Dusseldorf. You can't say, Google Now, listen, I'm not there right now. There's no easy way to do that.
There's nothing I could do.
Yeah.
Even deleting the emails didn't solve the problem. I mean, they were, in the ether somewhere. Zach, I wanted to hear from before we ran out of time. Yeah, no, you can dismiss it, but you can't
Matt
stop
will like
them.
tech support.
Yeah, somehow, I don't know. Now I just got to go to Dusseldorf or something.
On mic, please.
I think we've had a whole generation of people growing up on pretty inhuman/inanimate software. So why do you expect the machines to be human-like in the future? There are kids who are growing up on emoji and using software made by companies like Facebook, which has absolutely no emotion. So how can we expect the future generation to think about things they don't even are aware of? And I think that's the question to ask here, is that why do we keep talking about notifications of apps? I think notifications are basically just what email is to the web and to the app economy. I think what we should be thinking about, what is it that notifications are trying to achieve and not what they are. We're focusing too much on the envelopes and not on what they're trying to do. I think Google Now, for what it is actually pretty good. I don't think it is perfect, and same as with Siri, but they're trying to do things which are relevant to today and how we use the computers today. And I think going forward, there is pretty likely the information becomes even more precise and more less human in many ways.
I thought that, on John Steinberg, Alex wrote this essay where you define the notification as its efficacy based on whether or not it resolves the ambiguity, and the success being if it gives you the information as opposed to just letting you know that you've got the 4 emails, right? That was your essay. To me, and to Ohm's question of what is a notification, before I had read your essay, I actually defined a notification in my head as a partial piece of information that I then needed to go get more information to have the anxiety and ambiguity resolved. And I think that actually most of the definition of notification tends to be the negative, right? That negative aspect. So Dennis, to your point, whether it's fake humanness or creepiness, either way, I know it's not a person, right? To me, I get the Foursquare alert, which is a little bit more personal. Yes, it's undoubtedly more pleasant. But to me, the pain point is ultimately that it's always, I get a buzz on my wrist and I can't get the information, and now I'm just frustrated and in pain. I wish I hadn't even been given the notification, basically.
What's the fix? Tell me more.
I think I think Alex did a nice job with the essay. I mean, I think the problem with it is I think you need a redefinition of the notification. I think if you can't get the information, then you shouldn't be given a partial nudge, which just creates another task.
This is a disjointed thought now, like 4 comments ago. But
Who are you?
I'm Zach Seward. I work for Quartz Business News outlet. And the piece John was referring to earlier that I wrote this morning was like essentially all of what you're saying, and intended for sort of a different audience. But in the exercise was clear your home screen of all apps to force usage of like these more subtle features that iOS 9 and 8 have introduced to like get a better sense of what's going on. So for me, I think like a subtle shift that's happening that maybe the counterpoint to what you were saying earlier about like notifications are really on or off is, you know, the tools to do it are totally overtly complicated. Average users are never going to do it, but you know, you do have at this point the option, you know, send to watch, don't send to watch, send to home screen, don't send to home screen. It allows for, you know, different notification centers. So your lock screen versus your notification center actually can have different content in them. And that's not like nearly the kind of like email level tools for dealing with notifications that we have today, but it's clearly like points to an opportunity for the subtlety that like notifications lack. I had a quick question for anyone who might have a thought on this. So it seems like everybody's pretty much in agreement. I certainly would agree that like it's hard to beat the OS, like that any other attempts to be an aggregator of notifications are likely just to get usurped by iOS and Android getting smarter at it. So just generally my thoughts are, where does that leave apps like the demo we saw to start this? I mean, I can't imagine that's like a new question for you, so just curious how you're thinking about that, and if there will be room for these for apps that attempt to be a layer underneath but still act as aggregators.
Yeah, so to me it seems that this app that we saw, it's just an API. The sample apps are just sample apps. And if we develop an ecosystem of useful push notifications with a bunch of partners and a bunch of API developers that use that, it's not really easy to replicate that. So it's easy for a company like Apple to take over the notification screen, but what about all the ecosystem that is built around that?
Mr. Ellman.
So I'm Josh from Greylock. So I think there's this thing that they haven't talked about, which is like the power of notifications is because we know sometimes when the phone buzzes, it's a friend trying to talk to us, and sometimes it's actually urgent. And like that's where it all starts from, right? So everything that is written on top of notifications comes back to that core. And like almost everything that doesn't satisfy that is in some ways a mild disappointment, you know, unless it can be as compelling as somebody that, you know, their communication device is somebody that's trying to communicate with us, is trying to reach it. You know, and so I think like Am's point about this being about people is really important. You know, that like we actually care about who's trying to contact us. And so I think we just haven't, like, what I've seen happen on other platforms, and we certainly saw this at Facebook, is when everybody jumps on and tries to get on the fact that like, oh, you're there because someone you know and care about is trying to reach you, if I can either put words in their mouth or put other words in front of you when you're trying to find the people who want to reach you, maybe you'll trip over those, maybe they'll be lightly interesting, and you almost don't care about all the people who didn't like it because you got some people to like your message. And so I think we're just in this really interesting thing with notifications where 2 years ago they were new and now they're starting to get saturated. Now we're having conferences trying to actually figure it out again. And maybe people who've been through the Facebook journey are just like remembering this too vividly. But I think we're almost at this point, like, how do we get it back to this, like, it's somebody really important trying to communicate you that's either urgent so it buzzes your phone or not urgent so it, you know, leaves a message there for you to get when you come back to it, and really treat it like this ongoing conversation instead of what I think a lot of them are, which is, you know, FYIs or, you know, in case you missed it, which I don't think really help. You know, I think Foursquare does a good job. Hey, if you're here, go check this out right now, but it'd be great if they could pull it the moment that you walk away if you didn't actually see it.
So I think we're out of time, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, this is
But that's a good point.
That's great.
Yeah, but
I mean, I think that the pulling thing actually is very interesting because if something is truly useful to you in the moment, it doesn't need to exist outside of that moment. And so having improvements to the API to allow you to say, this is a human or a robot talking to you about something very important at the moment. But if you miss that, or if you're, if I'm up here and I'm getting notifications and it's like somebody's on first base, I don't care if they're on third base when I get out the stage. So that should go away. So I think that's an important improvement.
So I just want to say that when John and I started talking about doing this, this that just happened within the last 15 minutes or so is why we're here today. It's not about any of us, it's about all of us. And this kind of crosstalk is how this is going to build out. So we are out of time for this panel, but let's keep this going throughout the rest of the day.
Cool. Thanks everybody.
Interaction.